Deep within a cold, obsidian heart lies a secret that has been protected for an entire lifetime. We break through the hard exterior to find the warmth of humanity that still beats within. Hit subscribe now and discover the mysteries hidden in the dark corners of the soul.
Brother said it out loud, right there in the conference room in front of the attorneys and the accountant and my uncle, who flew in from Phoenix just to watch. He looked at the mediator, folded his hands on the table like he was about to deliver a sermon, and said, "My sister has no idea how to run a business. She never did. Dad knew it. We all knew it. He didn't even glance at me when he said it." I checked the time on my phone. 9:07 a.m. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. I figured it would take less than 40 minutes for everything to fall apart. For him, not for me. Have you ever sat across a table from someone who has been lying about you for so long they started to believe it themselves? Drop a yes in the comments. I want to know how many of you have been in that room. I want to know how many of you sat there and said nothing because you already knew how it ended. My brother's name is Garrett. He's 41. He's got the kind of face that looks trustworthy at first glance. Good jaw, steady eyes, the practiced calm of someone who has spent years learning how to seem reasonable. He wore a gray suit that morning. He'd gotten a haircut. He had brought 3 people with him: his personal attorney, the company's outside counsel, who he'd somehow convinced was neutral, and our uncle, who had never worked a day inside the business, but had strong opinions about everything. I came alone. I sat down across from all of them, put my folder on the table, and got a cup of coffee from the credenza in the corner like I was settling in for a normal Tuesday. Because for me, it was. Our father built Callaway Fabrication from nothing, literally nothing. A rented garage in Akron, 2 CNC machines he bought used, and a contract with a regional auto parts distributor that he landed by showing up to their office 3 days in a row until someone agreed to meet with him. That was 1989. By the time he died, the company had 42 employees, 2 facilities, and roughly $8 million in annual revenue. He left it to both of us equally. That was the problem, according to Garrett. Our father had been sick for almost 2 years before he passed. Kidney disease. He managed it at first. Dialysis 3 times a week, a specialist in Cleveland, adjustments to medication. I flew home every few months. Garrett lived 40 minutes away and visited on holidays. When Dad got worse, I moved back. I took a leave from my job. I was a financial analyst at a mid-sized firm in Chicago at the time. And I came home to Akron, and I helped manage the business while Dad was too tired to come in every day. I learned the operations. I learned the vendor contracts, the equipment maintenance schedules, the payroll system, the client relationships. Garrett came to the office twice during that period. Both times he took Dad to lunch and left before 3. When Dad died, the will was clear. 50-50. Co-owners. Equal voting rights on major decisions, with a provision that if we couldn't agree, we'd go to mediation before any legal action. For about 6 months, we tried to make it work. I handled day-to-day operations. Garrett handled, honestly, I'm not sure what Garrett thought he was handling. He sent emails occasionally. He had opinions about the break room renovation. He wanted to rebrand the company logo. Then I found the vendor contract. It was buried in a stack of invoices I was reconciling for the quarterly audit. A material supply agreement with a company called Boardroom Industrial, signed 8 months earlier, while Dad was still alive, while I was managing the floor and Dad was still technically the sole decision-maker. The contract was on unusual terms. We were paying roughly 22% above market rate for raw steel stock. The delivery schedule had a penalty clause that almost no fabrication company would agree to. And the signatory on behalf of Boardroom Industrial was a man named Owen Farley. Owen Farley was Garrett's college roommate. I didn't say anything. I closed the folder. I set it back in the filing cabinet. And I started paying attention in a way I hadn't needed to before. Over the next 3 months, I found 4 more contracts, all signed in the last 18 months of our father's life, when Dad was tired and trusting and had started relying on Garrett to handle the administrative stuff, while I was managing the shop floor. A maintenance contract with a company that shared a registered agent with a property Garrett owned in his wife's name. A software subscription for inventory management that we didn't use and had been auto-renewing for 2 years. A consulting agreement. I want you to really hear this. A consulting agreement paying an LLC $4,000 a month for strategic advisory services. And the LLC was registered to a post office box in Delaware that I eventually traced back to Garrett's personal accountant. He had been bleeding this company for almost 2 years. And then he filed for mediation, claiming I was mismanaging the business and demanding a buyout of his 50% stake at a valuation he'd had his own appraiser produce, a number that was, not coincidentally, almost exactly twice what a neutral third-party valuation would have yielded. He wanted $4 million. He wanted me to either pay it or agree to sell the whole company at his inflated number. And if I refused, his attorney had drafted a petition for court-ordered dissolution. He thought I was going to panic. He thought I was going to do what I'd done at every family dinner growing up. Get upset, get loud, say something he could use against me. He had spent 33 years watching me react. He thought he knew exactly how this would go. He had no idea I had spent 3 months getting ready for it. The mediator, a woman named Patricia, which I mention only because she had the most carefully neutral face I have ever seen in my life, opened the session by asking each party to summarize their position. Garrett went first. He was smooth. He talked about the company's declining performance over the past year. He referenced 2 client contracts we'd lost, conveniently omitting that we'd lost them because of a delivery failure caused by the penalty clause in the Bridgerton contract he had signed. He said I had emotional difficulty separating personal grief from professional responsibility. He said the business needed fresh leadership and that he was simply trying to protect his inheritance. He said it like he meant it. He almost made me feel sorry for him. Almost. Then he said the part that was supposed to bury me. I've had an independent review conducted of the company's financial records, he said, sliding a report across the table toward the mediator. The findings are concerning. Over the past 14 months, there have been numerous irregular expenditures, vendor overpayments, and at least 2 instances of what appears to be unauthorized cash disbursement from the operating account. My sister has been the sole signatory on these accounts since our father's passing. I am not making accusations. He paused. He looked at the mediator, then at me. I'm simply saying the numbers don't add up. And given the pattern of behavior, I think any reasonable person would want a full forensic audit before any buyout proceeds. The room was very quiet. My uncle shifted in his chair. His attorney made a note. Across the table, Garrett settled back slightly, satisfied. He thought he had just turned this into a question of my competence. He thought the suggestion of an audit, which would take months, which would freeze any sale process, which would cost money the company didn't have sitting idle, was a grenade I couldn't survive. He was right that the numbers didn't add up. He just didn't understand which direction they didn't add up in. I let the silence sit for a moment. I've learned to do that. Silence makes most people uncomfortable enough that they fill it with something they didn't mean to say. Garrett was already starting to reach for his water glass. I said, I think an audit is an excellent idea. He stopped mid-reach. In fact, I said, I've already commissioned one. I opened my folder. I had 3 copies, one for the mediator, one for the table, one I kept for myself. I slid them across. This is a forensic accounting review conducted by a firm with no prior relationship to Callaway Fabrication or either party in this room. They were engaged 6 weeks ago. The report was completed last Friday. The mediator opened her copy. She read the first page. Her carefully neutral face did something I don't think she intended. One eyebrow moved up, just slightly. The review found no evidence of mismanagement or unauthorized disbursements on my part, I said. What it did find is itemized beginning on page 4. I watched Garrett's attorney lean over and start reading. I watched the moment he found page 4 because his chin dropped about 1/4 of an inch and he went very still. The 5 vendor contracts I referenced, along with supporting documentation tracing the beneficial ownership of each counterparty, are in the appendix. The total amount extracted from company accounts through above-market pricing, fictitious consulting fees, and recurring subscriptions for unused services comes to approximately $340,000 over 22 months. I paused, give or take. Garrett's face had gone the particular color of someone who has just been told the building is on fire and also locked from the inside. She's making things up, he said, but his voice had lost about half its volume. He turned to his attorney. This is fabricated. She hired some firm to produce a document. The firm is listed on the cover page, I said. Their contact information is there. You're welcome to call them. She's been trying to push me out since Dad died. Everyone knows that. Garrett. I said his name the way you say something you've set down and don't intend to pick back up. The contracts have your signature. The ownership traces are public record filings. The bank records are certified copies. He turned to our uncle. He had been doing this all morning, angling for the gallery, looking for backup. Our uncle was staring at the table. The mediator set down her copy of the report. "Mr. Rands, Calloway," she said carefully, "I think we need to take a short recess." "We don't need a recess," Garrett said. "What we need is—" "We'll take 15 minutes," she said, in a tone that ended that sentence. During the break, I went to the hallway and got another cup of coffee from the cart near the elevator. I stood there and drank it and watched the city 20 floors below. I felt, honestly, very calm. Not happy exactly. Not triumphant. Just finished with something. The way you feel after you've been carrying a heavy bag for a long time and you finally put it on the ground. I want to explain something, because this is the question I knew people would have. Why didn't I confront him earlier? Why didn't I freeze the accounts the moment I found the first contract? Here's the answer. If I had confronted him at the first contract, it would have been a family dispute. He would have claimed he was acting in the company's interest, that he had verbal authorization, that I was misreading the terms. It would have been my word against his, and he had a lawyer on retainer who had been doing business with his family for 15 years. I might have gotten a settlement. I might have gotten a small restitution, and in 6 months, I'd have had a brother who was humiliated and furious and looking for every remaining way to make my life difficult. So I waited. I documented. I waited until the pattern was undeniable. I waited until the total was high enough and the trail was clean enough that there was no gray area left. No misunderstanding he could hide behind. No version of events where a reasonable person looked at the evidence and said, well, maybe. I didn't freeze his access. I let him keep thinking the controls weren't there. And while he was doing that, I was building a case that would hold up not just in mediation, but in a courtroom if it came to that. I came back to the room after 15 minutes. Garrett had clearly spent the break arguing with his attorney. His attorney looked like a man who had been asked to defend a position he no longer believed was defensible. "Look," Garrett said. He had shifted registers. He was trying something new, conciliation, reasonableness, the older brother who just wants what's fair. There may have been some choices that weren't communicated clearly. I was trying to help the company during a difficult period. Dad trusted me to make some calls. Maybe the documentation wasn't as thorough as it should have been. But the intent doesn't change the amount, I said. I'm trying to have a conversation here. We're in mediation, Garrett. That is a conversation. I turned to the mediator. I want to be clear about what I'm proposing. I'm not seeking dissolution of the company. I don't want to sell. I want to buy out my brother's stake at a fair market valuation, conducted by a neutral appraiser, not the one he hired, with the $340,000 of diverted funds offset against his buyout price. That's insane, Garrett said. You can't just... The alternative, I said, is that this report, which is currently a private document, gets filed as an exhibit in a civil proceeding for breach of fiduciary duty and conversion of company assets. I kept my voice completely level. I wasn't angry. I hadn't been angry in a long time. Anger would have made this messier. At that point, it becomes a matter of public record. It gets cross-referenced in any future background check. It creates issues with your professional license, your bonding, your relationship with whatever bank you currently use for your personal accounts. I let that land. I'm offering you a quiet exit, I said. I think that's generous. The silence that followed was different from the earlier silences. The earlier ones had been tense, pressurized. This one was more like the silence after something heavy falls, after the sound, before you've assessed the damage. My uncle cleared his throat. "Garrett," he said quietly. It was the first word he'd said in 2 hours. Garrett looked at him. Something passed between them. I don't know what exactly. I don't know what our uncle was thinking. Maybe he was thinking about my father. Maybe he was thinking about the fact that he had flown in from Phoenix to watch his nephew win, and that was no longer what was happening. Garrett's attorney leaned over and said something low in Garrett's ear. Garrett's jaw tightened. "What's the valuation process?" he asked. His voice had gone flat. The salesmanship was gone. "Neutral appraiser, agreed upon by both parties within 30 days. I'll cover the cost of the appraisal. The offset is non-negotiable." He was quiet for a long moment. He was looking at the table. I recognized the look, actually. I had seen it at family dinners when he was 17 and had been caught in a lie and was trying to calculate whether there was still a way out. There never had been. There wasn't now either. "Fine," he said. Just the one word. His attorney started talking about documentation and timelines. I half listened. I was watching Garrett. He was staring at a spot on the table. He had come into this room expecting to walk out with either $4 million or a demolished sister. He was leaving with neither. I want to tell you the part that people don't usually include in these stories because I think it's important. When it was over, when the mediator had outlined the next steps and the attorneys were gathering their papers and my uncle was putting on his coat and refusing to make eye contact, Garrett looked at me for the first time since I'd slid that folder across the table. He didn't say anything. He just looked at me for a second, and I could see it. The thing underneath the anger and the calculation and the performance. He was embarrassed. Not because he'd done something wrong. I don't think he'd spent much time feeling bad about the contracts. He was embarrassed because he had underestimated me, and I think some part of him had known the whole time that he was doing it. I didn't say anything either. There was nothing to say that would have helped. He walked out. His attorney followed. My uncle stopped by my chair on his way to the door. He put his hand briefly on my shoulder. He didn't squeeze, didn't say anything, just put his hand there for a moment, like he was acknowledging something, and then he left too. The mediator gathered her notes. She looked at me with that careful, neutral face. "You were very prepared," she said, which I understood was the most she was professionally permitted to say. "My father taught me to read a contract," I told her. She smiled at that. A small one, but real. The next 3 months were mostly paperwork. The neutral appraiser valued the company at slightly above $6 million, which meant Garrett's 50% was worth just over $3 million before the offset. After deducting the $340,000, his final buyout came to approximately $2.7 million. He didn't fight it. I don't think he had the appetite for a fight anymore, not with that report sitting in my folder. I took out a business loan to cover it. The terms were workable. The company's receivables were strong enough that 3 banks competed for the deal, which I mentioned because 6 months earlier, Garrett had told the mediator that the business was in distress. It wasn't. It was bleeding through 5 bad contracts. Once those were unwound, the underlying business was solid. I'm telling you this because I think it matters. I think the distinction between a business that is failing and a business that is being drained is important. They look the same from the outside. They feel the same if you're watching the numbers go down. But the causes are different and the solutions are different, and if you misidentify which one you're dealing with, you will make the wrong choice every time. The day the final transfer cleared, the day Callaway Fabrication became mine, fully, with no outstanding claims and no outstanding partners, I did 2 things. I went down to the shop floor and told the crew they had known something was happening, in the way that employees always know when something is happening, that low hum of uncertainty that comes through in a manager's distracted look or a locked door meeting. I told them it was resolved. I told them the company was staying open, staying in Akron, and that anyone who was there when my father was sick and kept showing up was someone I didn't intend to forget. One of the machinists, a guy named Dale who has been there for 19 years and still has a photo of my dad on his workbench, shook my hand and said he would have liked how you handled it. I didn't cry, but it was a near thing. Then I went home and I deleted Garrett's number. Not because I was angry. I was past angry. I deleted it because there was nothing left to say, and keeping it would have just been a way of keeping a door open that needed to be closed. I know some people will say I should have reported it. I thought about it. I talked to an attorney about it. The honest answer is that what Garrett did existed in a complicated space. He was a co-owner, the contracts were signed with our father's nominal knowledge, and the legal threshold for criminal charges in that context is higher than most people realize. A civil recovery was cleaner, faster, and certain. I chose certain. I also know some people will say I should have confronted him earlier, that I let it go on too long, that I took on risk I didn't need to. Maybe. But I had watched my father spend 30 years giving Garrett chances, and I had watched Garrett spend 30 years taking them without ever using them to become someone different. I wasn't interested in another chance. I was interested in another chance. I was interested in an ending. I have 42 employees now. I'm opening a 3rd facility next year. A smaller one, focused on aerospace components, which requires tolerances that not every shop in the region can hold. We can. My father built something that can hold them. I run the company the way he would have wanted it run, which is to say, I know every person's name, I know what their machines do, and I read every contract before I sign it. Especially the ones that someone else tells me I don't need to worry about. There is something I have thought about a lot since that morning in the mediation room. It's this. Garrett never actually thought I was incompetent. That's the part that took me the longest to understand. He knew I had managed the floor during Dad's illness. He knew I'd done the quarterly audits. He knew, on some level, exactly what I was capable of. He just counted on me not using it against him. He thought that because I had always been the quieter one, the one who kept the peace, the one who didn't make Thanksgivings difficult, he thought that was who I was permanently, fundamentally, in all contexts. He confused my patience with weakness. He confused my silence with confusion. I was never confused. I was building a case. There's a version of this story where I confronted him over that first contract, and it turned into a 2-year legal battle that exhausted both of us and potentially collapsed the company in the process. There's a version where I took the dissolution deal and walked away with whatever cash I could get and spent the next decade wondering what my father's work was worth. There's a version where I cried in that mediation room and let him see it and handed him exactly the reaction he had been banking on. None of those are the version that happened. The version that happened is the one where I sat down, opened a folder, and said, I have a forensic audit. I have the ownership traces. I have the certified bank records. And I have been waiting 6 weeks for you to walk into this room and hand me the opportunity to use them. My father used to say that patience is just preparation you haven't needed yet. I think about that a lot these days. On the mornings I come in early and walk the floor before the first shift starts. When the machines are quiet, and the light comes in through the high windows and everything smells like steel and cutting fluid, and the particular kind of permanence that comes from making something with your hands. He built it. I'm keeping it. That's enough. I've thought a lot about what made that morning in the mediation room go the way it did. And I keep coming back to the same answer, which is not the forensic audit, not the ownership traces, not the certified bank records. Those were tools. What made it work was the 3 months I spent before I ever walked into that room deciding exactly who I was going to be when I got there. Garrett counted on me being the person I'd always been in family settings. The one who kept things smooth, who absorbed the tension so no one else had to, who made herself smaller so he could seem bigger. He had 33 years of data on that version of me. What he didn't have was any data on what I became once I understood that his plan only worked if I kept playing my part in it. That's the thing about people who take advantage of someone's patience. They almost always mistake it for a permanent character trait. They see you absorbing unfairness, and they conclude you can't see it. They see you staying quiet, and they conclude you have nothing to say. They keep taking because the taking keeps working, and they never stop to ask why you're letting it work. The possibility that you have a reason doesn't occur to them, because in their version of events, you're not that sophisticated. You're just easy. I was never easy. I was waiting. There's a version of ethics that I used to find frustrating. The idea that doing the right thing means accepting bad outcomes gracefully. That integrity requires you to absorb harm without recourse. I don't believe that anymore. I think the more honest version of integrity is this. You act within the rules. You document what you do. You build something that holds up to scrutiny. And when someone tries to take it from you, you defend it with everything you actually have. That's not revenge. That's just not giving away what's yours. What I had was built slowly. Over years, I didn't know I was being prepared. My father taught me how to read a contract. He taught me what a balance sheet actually says versus what someone wants you to think it says. He taught me that the floor is where the real information lives. Not the boardroom, not the quarterly report, but the floor, where the people who actually make things work show up every day and know exactly what's true. I learned those things because I was paying attention, not because I thought I'd need them for this. I needed them for this. Garrett drained $340,000 from a company our father spent 30 years building. He did it carefully, incrementally, while I was managing the shop floor and Dad was too sick to audit every signature. And then, when the money was gone, he came to the table and tried to use the evidence of his own theft as proof that I was incompetent. That is a particular kind of audacity. It requires you to believe, completely, that the other person will never figure it out. I figured it out. The day Dale shook my hand on the shop floor and said my father would have liked how I handled it, I understood something I hadn't had words for yet. What my father built wasn't just a business. It was a set of conditions. Steady work, reliable contracts, a place where people could count on showing up and being counted on. Protecting that wasn't about me and Garrett. It was about the 42 people who came in every morning because this place was dependable. Letting Garrett walk away with it, or burn it down on his way out, would have been a failure I couldn't have lived with. Patience is not passivity. Preparation is not aggression. And silence, when you know what you know and you're waiting for the right moment to use it, is one of the most powerful things a person can choose. My father knew that. I know it now.